for you, Brianna. And then we can open your presentation and get that started. So just a couple announcements. If you're signed up for one class or 15, you're all invited to the Friday sessions, which is tomorrow. You hopefully got our email reminder yesterday about what's coming up. Havana's Black Renaissance at 9:30 and 11:30 Pollinators. The Pollinators is online only, but we promise if you come here in person for the earlier session, you can stay here and watch the later session. We'll just put it up on the screen. We also, please read those weekly emails we send to you. We'll always have important announcements in there, including the Silver Seminar that's coming up on March 22nd. Next week is the last time you can RSVP to tell us you're coming. We want to have enough food for everyone. We buy you lunch that day. And Robert G. Silvers was the wonderful Osher member who passed away. His wife created this endowed lectureship series. And Ian Kirby is flying in from Connecticut. He's a world-renowned furniture designer to talk about furniture yesterday and today. So that'll be a really interesting 90-minute session followed by a nice lunch. You could sit down with your Osher friends. So I hope you will join us for that. Brianna, let's talk about how you want, will you have some stopping points in your presentation for checking to see if there are questions, things like that?
With it being so, I want it to be conversational. So I want interruptions and things like that. So I can stand here and do both.
Fantastic. And when you're sharing your screen, chats that come in.
I'll pop the chat out.
Okay, perfect. You know what you're doing. Brianna knows what she's doing. But Brianna, one thing I found when you're focused on your subject matter, sometimes all the weird tech stuff goes out the window. So just say, Jennifer, Jeff, I can't remember how to do this. Will you come help me? And we're listening, we're watching, we will help out. I did already start the recording. Good. Okay, so we are so pleased to have our county clerk for Boone County, Missouri here to teach this 4-week session. Brianna Lennon previously worked in the Missouri Secretary of State's office as Deputy Director of Elections and Elections Counsel and holds a law degree and master's in public policy from the University of Missouri. Brianna is also a certified elections registration administrator through the National Association of Election Officials. We are in excellent hands, so I would love to turn this over to Brianna.
Well, thanks so much. I'm very excited to be talking with everyone during this course. Full disclosure, I'm only doing it as a 4-session course because it is kind of my first time teaching, and although I have given a lot of presentations on elections things, filling an hour and a half, I hope to be able to do that. I am sure that you all will help me do that because a lot of what I want to talk about involves perceptions with voters, and the questions that you all have are indicative of questions that other voters have too. So the more that we can talk about it, the better that we will all be able to understand the process. So I do have a question in the chat. How do you want online questions? In the chat would be perfect. If you out in the Zoom world have questions, drop them in the chat. I will keep it open too. This first session, I know we only have 4, but this one is going to have tons of information, probably too much information, but I want us to get to a starting point of every part of the process that's involved in the elections administration so that in the future classes we can dive into specific topics. Yes.
For Osher, they have online, they put the documentation online. Will you make your slides available?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So this is something that we've been working on. We have a association of local election authorities, like a statewide one, that we've been working on trying to get better education out. And so this is also a foray into seeing if we can extrapolate this into more than just Boone County. We're going to talk about Boone County, but some of these things are universal to other counties too. So if you have come from another county, or if you're on Zoom and you live in another county, some of these things will also apply to you. Some of them we do a little bit differently, but that's part of the whole conversation that I want to have. So I'm going to start out, maybe. this. Is it not
Brianna,
on?
if you click your mouse on the slide itself, it'll just engage the process. There we go.
There it is. All right, cool. Okay, so laying the foundation, every election has an element of each of these 5 things. So this is what we're going to cover in today's conversation. The voter registration process, ballot content and creation, voting equipment, the actual voting process, and then the certification and audit that happens after the fact. Because there's a lot of things I think that, you hear or you read in the newspaper, well, Missouri's trying to implement this, or they're trying to reform this. But very few times do they have the context for what it already looks like. So when you see something in the paper that says, Missouri's trying to be fully paper-based, well, we already are. We already vote on paper ballots. So it's good to have that foundation for when you are critically looking at whether people are bringing up reforms, if they actually do change anything, or if they are just kind of window dressing. So we're going to start with, this is something I put it up there for, it's not for shock value, but mostly for just a general understanding. After working in the clerk's office for about a year, this is what I created to give to anybody that's new that starts working in the office, to just show all the working parts of what it takes to run an election. So at the top of it, the election calendar, calling the election, we know when the elections are going to be. We know April, August, and November, but occasionally in an odd numbered year, there may be an open election date with nothing actually set for it. So sometimes there are little surprises. We had a February election for Ashland. That was a surprise. They have a deadline that they have to meet to tell us whether they want an election on that date. But once we know that there's going to be an election on that date, it kicks off all of these other processes. We have to check with the polling places we normally use to make sure they're still available. At the same time, we're making sure absentee voting prep is ready. We're making sure we have enough election judges. We're testing our voting equipment. So the yellow on this are all of the subject areas, which is why that's what we're going to be talking about for the different elements of making the election work. All the things in white are just the daily processes. Like you'll see on absentee voting where it says roll call. Roll call is our internal tracking to make sure that if we get 100 absentee ballot applications, we enter 100 absentee ballot applications into our system, and then we check it against the 100 pieces of paper that we have. That's roll call. So we're making sure everything works. So those are all office specific things, but the yellow things are the subject areas. So voter registration, it happens year round. The big joke that a lot of people that work in elections say is people say, well, what do you do the other 364 days of the year? There's things to do. And so voter registration is really the basis of eligibility and the foundation of creating any election. So in Missouri, in order to be registered to vote, you at least have to be 17 and a half years old, you have to be a U.S. citizen, and you have to be a resident of Missouri. There are a couple other requirements, like you can't be serving a felony sentence. Once you're off the felony sentence, you can become a voter. Again, we do have that eligibility reinstatement. We're one of the states that allows that to happen. But if they're still serving probation and parole on their sentence, then they can't. And they can't be adjudged incapacitated by a court. That's really more like a guardianship thing. So if you've got somebody that ends up needing a guardianship and goes to the court, you can still, now we've tried to work, local election authorities and the courts have tried to work on making sure it's very specific that when somebody gets put into a guardianship, that they affirmatively say in the court order, yes, you can keep the right to vote, or no, you can't. Because previously people just said, oh, guardianship, can't vote anymore. There are situations where people are still able to make a judgment to be able to cast a ballot, but maybe they need guardianship for another reason. So that's helped because it's helped kind of identify a place where we didn't, we're not all experts in guardianship law, and it's helpful to be able to say, these people can still vote even though they have a guardianship, and these people cannot. Every voter registration, once it comes into our office, whether it comes in by our online application system, whether it's a postcard, whether somebody does it in person. So if you come in person and we see you, we still have to validate all your voter registration information. So it gets checked against the Missouri Department of Health and Human Services because you want people that are alive. And that's the list of people that have passed away. So if you put a new voter registration into the system, it will pop up and say, this person is no longer alive. And then we know that there is a problem and we need to look into it. It checks against the Department of Corrections because, again, if you've got an active felony sentence, you can't be registered to vote. So it'll let us know if we put it in, oh, this person has a felony match, you better look into that. It also checks against the Social Security Administration. So that's another check on whether the person is alive, but also if their name, their birth date, the last of their Social Security number are all valid. Because if someone gave this fake information, even if they're a real person, the SSA verification is going to show us, hey, there's something not quite right with this registration, you need to look into it. And then finally, the Department of Revenue. So if we have your information for making sure that you have a driver's license, it's not required that you give us that information, but it's just another way for us to be able to check the information. If it comes back and says, hey, this person's registered here, but their Department of Revenue address is here, then we can check with the voter of what's their most up-to-date address. Oftentimes it's the one that we have because people don't change their driver's license every time they move. But you do have to update your voter registration every time you move, otherwise you won't be eligible to vote. All of this information and the reason why we can check against all of these different sources is because it is entered into a database, and that database is maintained by the Secretary of State's office. So the Secretary of State's office, because they are a state government agency, has the capability of interfacing with all four of those other agencies. And then we get the benefit of that at the local level because it allows us to have a repository of good information. So this happens on an ongoing basis. People are coming onto the list and we're adding people every day that register to vote or they update their information. But people move and they pass away, people become ineligible, things happen all the time. I always tell people our voter registration list is always a live list. You can see a snapshot of it. If somebody asks us for a voter list, it's public information, we can give it out, but it is in real time. So if I gave you a list today, it won't look like a list from tomorrow because somebody will move, somebody will die, somebody new will get added. So we are constantly doing maintenance on it as well. So how do we do maintenance? We also have a lot of resources at our disposal, but this is the main way that we are doing it. Because of the system of elections administration that we have, both at the federal level and at the state, the mail is a very important part of it. So that's why I added that. Too long didn't read. Check your mail all the time. If it has election mail in it, you're going to want to know what it is. Even if you think you know what it is, open it up anyway. It might be, you know, hey, we thought that we mailed something to you and it bounced back. Just give us your new address. So we get reports from the Secretary of State's office about people that have passed away, reports of people that have dropped off the felony list. So not only do we see Department of Corrections information when somebody gets a felony and shouldn't be registered, they gave us a list of people too that say, here's 10 people on your voter roll that are listed in disqualified status because they have a felony, but they just finished their sentence and you can reinstate them again. So we have a lot of good reports that allow us to keep that up to date. We also get to use the National Change of Address that the post office maintains. We have a vendor that does that for us, and then they give us a list of here's all the people that have moved in your area but still have their old address on the voter file. We send them a letter and say, hey, we got a notice that your address changed, but you didn't tell us. Can you just fill this out and then we'll update it and then you'll be good to go for the next election. That's tied into our biennial canvas. So by law, every 2 years, we have to send out voter ID cards to everybody. Even though we have photo ID and the voter ID card can't be used for voting, there are some things that can be used for non-elections related. Some people use them for getting their driver's license, but we have to still send them out because that's the way that the infrastructure of elections administration is based on mail. So this week, probably this weekend or early next week, everybody will be getting in their mailbox a sample ballot mailing, which we send for every election anyway. But during the biennial canvass period, which is every even numbered year, along with the sample ballot, you'll get a voter ID card. So the sample ballot is going to be really thick in the mail this year because when we print on voter ID cards, they have to be on cardstock. And because of the way we print them, the whole absentee ballot ends up on cardstock. So it's going to be very heavy and thick. Sample ballots for other elections are just pieces of yellow paper, but this one is our canvas. So the whole reason, in addition to sending them out for people so that they have good voter education and know what they're going to be voting on for the election that's coming up, we also can take action on any sample ballot mailings that are sent back to us. So if we get, and we will, get mail trays full of sample ballots that didn't make it to their intended destination for whatever reason, we then put that into the voter registration system. There's a little thing that says, has this person moved? And then you put in their new address if there's a forwarding address when the mail gets returned back and that yellow piece of sticker is on there. You can put that in there and then it spits out another letter because you always have to send 2 pieces of mail to a person before you're able to move them into inactive status. So once you have sent out that mailing, we get it back. We send you another mailing that says, hey, we think you moved. That's a forwardable piece. We don't send it to exactly the same address because obviously we know it didn't get to you the first time. We send it forwardable, so hopefully it gets to your new address. And then hopefully the person either says, nope, you're right, I don't live in Boone County anymore, and then tells us and we can take them off of our voter roll. Or they say, oh, here's our new address, and then we can just make the change. All of that can be done by using our website or by using the mail. We try to give people every opportunity to keep their address updated, but it's hard because I don't think a lot of people really internalize, especially if you just change apartments. So like if you're living in the same general apartment complex and you just move down the hall, or you are in a dorm and you move, or move down the street on the same street, we need to know, even if it's just as simple as saying like, well, I was in apartment D and now I'm in apartment E. All of that is really, really important. And the reason for that is because it helps feed into the creation of how we do ballots, how we make sure all the polling places are staffed, and how we make sure that you get the right ballot when you go to the polling place. I'm going to take a quick second because that was a lot. Voter registration is a lot. And I'm going to look at these questions real quick and then we'll see if we have any questions here. How many states authorize convicted felons not on parole or prison to vote? I will look into it. I'll bring that information to the next class. Felons getting notified that they are eligible to vote. When felons come off of the list and we get the notice like, hey, these 10 people, you can add them back into your voter roll because they're no longer serving felony sentence, it does automatically send them a voter ID card. So if you are on the roll already, you get to stay on the roll. We probably don't have your correct address because if you were serving like a 15-year felony and the last address we had for you was on Ash Street and now you live over on College, we're not going to know that. So we're still going to get returned mail. And we try to work locally with our probation and parole offices to make sure that anybody coming off of probation and parole gets a voter registration card as part of their, not onboarding, the opposite of onboarding, re-entry process. They can do a voter registration. Oh, somebody asked if they should change their address if they used it to, if they registered to vote at an address and then they moved to a fraternity house. Yes, he should change his address to vote because now his legal residence is that he's at a fraternity house. And then this is a great question too, because obviously everybody saw that the eligibility requirements, they have to be 17 and a half, a Missouri resident, and a U.S. citizen. Somebody asked, how do you check for U.S. citizenship? It is primarily an honor system because there is a box at the top of the voter registration card that says, are you a U.S. citizen? Are you at least 18 years old, 17 and a half years old to be able to register? They have to check that. If they don't check that, then we cannot register them. So the person filling out the form does have to affirmatively say, yes, I am a citizen. If they are not, I will tell you from personal experience, if they are not and they are trying to register to vote, it's either a mistake and we get a call usually later from like their immigration attorney because they're trying to become a citizen and they're like, they did not mean to register to vote. I am so sorry. We were not supposed to do that. And, you know, they deal with it how they need to deal with it. Or they honestly don't know, because a lot of times when people are filling out government paperwork, they don't feel like they have the power to say no in that conversation. They're working with a government official. The government official's handing them something. They think that you handed it to me, I'll fill it out. If somebody's doing something untoward, they're trying to break the law, they're trying to break the law probably in more ways than just registering to vote. And so we will occasionally hear from law enforcement that are like, hey, we've got this tax evasion case and this other stuff is happening. Do they also happen to be registered to vote? And I dealt with that too. When I worked in the Secretary of State's office, there was a legitimate case of fraud where two individuals, and it wasn't a citizenship issue, but two individuals were registered to vote at an abandoned building. You're not supposed to do that. They clearly didn't live there. But the reason they got caught is because they had also listed that abandoned building as their residence for the IRS. And the IRS was like, you don't live there. You're just evading things. And so through the course of that investigation, they ended up also getting hit with voter fraud cases, and now they can't vote ever again. So that is all to say that there are so many mechanisms in place to catch the people that are intentionally doing it badly, that if, in my experience, if things happen, for one thing, it's pretty isolated, and for another, it's usually more likely to be a mistake than it is some intentional, you know, like, oh, I registered to vote because I thought that I could, and, you know, like most of the time, they don't know. Yes.
Got a question for you. It's kind of, why don't all states use this method? It's very logical. What Missouri requires.
For keeping everything up to date?
All the requirements.
So most of them do.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's the thing is, did any of you all know that that's what we do with the voter registration before I told you today? Because the news doesn't cover what we do in the office. And so when you hear things like, well, Georgia just lets anybody vote and they just send things out, there are mechanisms like Arizona, for example, sends a ballot out to everybody. Well, if you're sending a ballot out to everybody, you better be really good at list maintenance. So they've got reports and instructions from the Secretary of State's office. Their manual is like 500 pages from the Secretary of State's office to make sure everything is good, because they know if they have your address wrong, you're not getting a ballot. And sometimes when you see there being issues, like there was a great instance where somebody was trying to call out Maricopa County last week because a person said, I've got 2 ballots. I got these 2 ballots. Maricopa sent me these 2 ballots. And now it's kind of the world that we live in where like county clerks, county recorders are online a lot because that's where most of the commentary is. And so the clerk for Maricopa said, yeah, see how that ballot has a 01 and that envelope has a 02, and see how you redacted your address on this one and on this one, but this address looks longer. It's because we sent those ballots to the printer on February 20th and you were at this address. And on February 21st, you changed your address. So we sent you your new ballot. And the fact that it says number 2 means it's the second version of the ballot that we sent out. So when we sent out number 2, it invalidated number 1. So even if you want to send both ballots back, we already have in our system and know that we can't count number one because it's not your valid address anymore. And we invalidated it when we sent out number two. But that doesn't change the fact that some person is still mad they got 2 ballots. And it makes better news to say, Maricopa is sending out 2 ballots. Maricopa explained exactly how they put all their control mechanisms in place. But that stuff doesn't sound interesting enough. So a lot of it ends up in a situation where, like, I can go out and I can tell people as much as I want that we do all of these different things. But there will still be somebody that says, like, but how come I got a voter registration ID card for somebody that doesn't live here anymore? Because they gave us that information, and the fact that you got it means the system is working. So a lot of the stuff in elections is just set up to be able to catch when something goes wrong, both because we want to make sure that people that are intentionally trying to do things wrong get caught, but also because we don't want mistakes to happen. I think that cleared out questions in the chat too. Does anybody else have other questions before we get into?
Do we have safeguards like that nationally?
So there are no election administration processes nationally because we are a decentralized election system. Every state is tasked with running their own elections. And that's like the big thing that people talk about when they talk about voting for president is like, oh, well, we're voting for president. You're voting in your own state. There is no national election. There's just 50 state elections. So there's some requirements, and we'll talk, they're really important when it comes to voting machines. And so we'll talk about it in that class because that is a place where the federal government has inserted themselves more to provide more like checks and balances for voting machines. And there is a law about basically protection to make sure that you don't get removed from a voter roll list arbitrarily. So the fact that we use the mail so much is because there is a federal law that basically says we have to use the mail. But all the ins and outs, the state registration database and how it operates, that's wholly within just the state. So every state has its own database that it uses. Some are better than others. Some are newer than others. Ours is very old. But then I felt better. I went to Massachusetts for a conference and somebody was showing me theirs and it looked terrible. And then I felt much better about what we have. All right. So in the process, if you're thinking, I tried to lay this out chronologically. I know that I'm too in deep to know whether this makes sense anymore. So feel free to say, like, you skipped over a bunch of stuff. I don't get it. But if you're thinking about all the time voter registration is happening and the year is progressing and we're now 20 weeks before an election. 20 weeks before an election, in that process, candidates are going to be filing. And in order for candidates to file, we have an obligation to notify the offices that filing is going to happen and the public of the qualifications, the timing, where to go, all those different things. For example, candidate filing is happening right now, and it is for anything that's going to be on the August ballot. So even though everybody's thinking about the presidential preference caucuses that some just happened, some will be happening at the end of the month, and the April 2nd election is happening, we're doing candidate filing for the August primary election right now. So everything is kind of happening at the same time. But the state and federal offices, including our circuit judges, are doing all that filing with the Secretary of State. So we don't even really need to think about them until the Secretary of State's office tells us who officially filed and should be on the August ballot. And they're not going to do that until May. So we just kind of wait. That process continues. Meanwhile, in our office, we are filing anybody that wants to run for county offices. So we've got 2 associate commissioner positions that are up, the county treasurer, the county sheriff, all of those things, they're filing right now too. And then for the April election, filing actually happened back in December. So way back in December, determined what was going to be on the ballot that you're going to see on April 2nd. That's school boards, cities, fire districts, and the people that want to run for those offices file specifically with those offices. So what it looks like when they certify to us what we need to put on the ballot on their behalf. This is an example. The one on the left is what we get when we're going to put something on the April 2nd election. So this is what Southern Boone Schools sent to us. And this is also why when somebody calls us and says, I need all the contact information for everybody that's on the ballot, that's all we got from Southern Boone. So there's no way for me to be like, well, here's Amy Begman's information, because we don't get any of their personal information. They just give us, here are the names that we want to see on the ballot, and it's been up to them to vet those candidates and do everything that they need to do. We are really just ministerial at that point. And then the same for the information we get from the Secretary of State's office. On the right there is what we will get when it's time to put together the August ballot. It'll have all of the candidates that we should be putting on the ballot, as well as, weirdly, the law has not been updated. It does include party emblems, even though party emblems are not used for anything. They used to be at the top of every ballot. We also used to have where you could just check whether you wanted every Democrat or every Republican on the ballot. We don't have that anymore either, but there are weird little vestiges of all those things in the law, and that's one of them, having the party emblems. Yes.
So for like school board, fire board, all of those political entities, they have to certify that the individual is qualified and can run for that board. They do that for you, and you just administerially then put whatever they certify to you.
Yes. So the only caveat that I would add to that is actually very similar to, and I'm not getting into partisan discussions on this, just to preface, the Supreme Court decision that was 9-0 on being able to kick Donald Trump off of the ballot said that elections administrators effectively do not have the authority to check qualifications. There's nothing in federal law that gives them that. Similarly, in state law, there's nothing that gives me the authority to kick anybody off the ballot. So I tell people, and the same thing happens for these districts as well. And it's really hard, I think, especially if you're in a very small city or something and somebody walks in to file for mayor and you're like, you don't live in town. You should not be able to register. You should not be able to do this. I actually have your voter registration and it says you don't live in town. It's on the candidate to say, nope, I swear under an oath of perjury that I live in town and I'll be qualified to be mayor if you elect me. And the city just has to take it. And I tell people, like, if a 10-year-old walks in and wants to run for county sheriff, even though the law says they've got to be 18, they've got to be a registered voter, they've got to have a peace officer's license, I have to let them do it. And it's on them if they're going to get in trouble. There are mechanisms already in Missouri law to get somebody kicked off of a ballot. It's just that election authorities don't have the statutory authority to do it. The Ethics Commission, Missouri Ethics Commission can do it. The Missouri Department of Revenue can do it because you have to swear that you don't have any unpaid taxes. If you have unpaid taxes, the Department of Revenue can disqualify you. And then the big thing, and this is very similar to the Supreme Court ruling, is that there's a mechanism where an opposing candidate can sue to have you kicked off the ballot. Because if they have evidence that you don't meet the qualifications, they can bring it up in a court of law. But it has to be brought up in a court of law. You can't just say, but I know that you don't meet these qualifications. My hands are tied on it, just like the cities and the school districts are. It makes it a slower process. And I think there were instances where it was happening, but there have been enough court cases now that have really kind of slapped hands of county clerks and also cities and school districts that have tried.
What about then if it gets, okay, they'll say a candidate, the 10-year-old boy files, and then somebody files a lawsuit saying, well, you can't run for sheriff because X, Y, and Z. But the court case the length of time runs into election period? Or is there some mechanism where you can get that resolved before I have to vote?
So you're right, it may not end up being resolved in enough time to deal with something on the ballot. So in those situations, it's very similar to when a person chooses to withdraw after the ballots have been printed. So their name is still going to be on the ballot. Then it comes down to the entity that is going to be swearing in that person is going to have the ability to say, I'm not going to swear you in. I don't even care if you won. If the lawsuits, if the court said that you can't be this person, then we can't seat you. And that was what happened. One of the big court cases in Missouri was about a state representative. And the court case went on so long that she did appear on the ballot, but the court said the appropriate mechanism is that the House of Representatives should not seat somebody that is not qualified, not that they need to be taken off the ballot in advance.
Thank you.
Is that just in Missouri? You're just talking about Missouri, right?
I'm sure it is some other states too, but for Missouri, yes, it's definitely like that. And then that's why I wasn't terribly surprised when the Supreme Court case came down, because it's very similar to what we already do here. Which is not, I mean, from the perspective of elections administrators or ministerial, we have a lot of power, even though we have bipartisan teams doing everything. You don't want us to be able to kick somebody off the ballot, even if we have evidence that they're not registered to, or something like that.
So that would explain, I think, I don't know, it was a while back, the sample ballot that came out in one of the state legislature people was like, I want to do B or something. I mean, that was the name on
Oh, yeah.
the sample ballot. And I'm just-
Chief Wannadoobie.
Yeah, Chief Wannadoobie, yeah. So that person, they couldn't kick that person off just because.
Right. And we're kind of seeing that now. There is a situation at the state level where a party wants to kick somebody off. And that gets really into some of the nuanced stuff of, like, well, we know that the Ethics Commission can, we know that Department of Revenue can, we know a candidate can sue and the court can do something. But one of the requirements for filing is that you pay your filing fee. The filing fee has to be paid to a political party. And if the political party doesn't want your filing fee, what happens? So,
Really? Say that again?
if the political party refuses to take your filing
No,
fee.
no, okay, maybe I'm misinterpreting. You can only register to be a candidate if a political party accepts your fee?
If you are running for like a county office or something that you have a designation of a political party after your name. So like when I run for county clerk, I have to give the Boone County Democratic Central Committee $100.
Okay,
So if they say, I don't want your $100, I don't want you to be a Democratic candidate.
okay, but you can be another party candidate or just.
In theory, yes, but if nobody will take your filing fee, you're kind of up a creek.
So somebody has to accept, if I want to, this is fascinating. If I want to run against you, that'll never happen. And, okay, so you have the Democrats, and you're a Democrat, and he's a Republican. This is just for argument's sake, okay? And here I come along and, oh, I want to run. And you each get someone to accept your filing fee. Who's going to accept mine if I claim to be neither Democrat nor Republican?
So then in Missouri, you'd have to run as an independent candidate. But running as an independent candidate requires you to circulate a petition.
Uh-huh,
So there is a mechanism for it. And if you want to run as an independent candidate, you skip the August primary. Because as an independent, you don't need to be on the August ballot.
They make
So-
you jump through hoops then.
Yeah, there are mechanisms, they're just different.
They're gonna make it hard, okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So the Supreme Court decision shouldn't be a shock to anybody, why they voted 9-0.
No, and I think that's probably why, I mean, it was unanimous, and that makes it pretty non-political if all of them agreed, like,
Exactly.
no, an election authority doesn't have the ability to do that.
Right.
Okay.
All right, so that is how we get things on the ballot. So now we know what's going to be on the ballot. We've gotten everything certified to us. All the candidates have filed and done everything that they need to do. Now we have to translate all those certifications into an actual ballot. And the first thing that we do is put all of the candidate and the election information. MCVR is the statewide voter registration database that has all the voter registrations in it. It also has elections information in it. It's a real workhorse. So we put all of the information about what's going to be on the ballot, who the people are, and all of that, because your voter registration, the big advantage to having it in the centralized database is that you're linked to all the districts that you're supposed to be voting in. So it says, like for me, Brianna Lennon, and then it would have like the 19 districts that I am tied to. I'm in the Columbia School District. I'm in the 4th Ward of Columbia. I'm in whatever township I'm in, all the different things, because all those different things could put something on the ballot. You don't normally see the water districts on the ballot, but they could be on the ballot if they had a reason for an election. So all those different districts are in there. Everybody has a unique, not unique, but every area, every precinct has a unique combination of what they're going to see on the ballot. So we put that information into MCVR, so that way if you, living in County Commission District A and State Representative District 1, you get a different ballot than somebody living in County Commission District B and State Representative District 1. Because even if you're going to vote on the same representative, you're going to need a different ballot for your county commission. So all of that gets tied in to the system. And then we also we basically have 2 databases. The second database is specific to our voting equipment. And our voting equipment is what actually renders them into ballot PDFs. So all that information gets put into MCVR, all that information, except for the voter information, because we don't need the voter information to create a PDF of a ballot, but we do need all the district information. That gets created as well. That computer, if you've been in our office before, there's a big open area in the front where voters can come in and they can absentee vote or register or talk to staff. On the end, there's a big glass kind of case, which is a big office that has our voting equipment in it that we keep in the office, but also the computer that we use to program the ballot PDFs. So even the program that we use to create a ballot is not connected to the internet, because that program that we use to create the ballot also creates all of the technology, the USB sticks that we use in the voting equipment, and then also is the same computer that we put the USB sticks back into to do the tabulation. So it's really important that that computer never gets connected to the internet, and it never shares USB or anything with something that gets connected to the internet. That computer only talks to election equipment. Election equipment is not connected to the internet, and it only happens through USB devices. Then once we have created all the ballots and we have programmed all the voting machines, we need to figure out how many ballots that we need. That is it's funny because like in our office it's joked as a secret formula to determine how many ballots you need. Really, it's a combination of looking at how many people are registered to vote that are eligible to vote at this polling place with this ballot style. Let's look at some previous elections that are similar to see how many people actually turned out, because even if 5,000 people were eligible to vote at this polling place, if in the last election 500 people turned out, I'm not going to order thousands of ballots. I'll order, 700 ballots, because that's closer to what realistically we're going to have. That is something that I think is definitely an issue that will put you in the news as fast as the fastest thing that really could put a local election in the news is if you run out of ballots. Nobody ever wants to run out of ballots, so you always have to kind of over-order, even though it creates waste. And we'll talk more about some of the solutions that elections industry has tried to do to solve that, like ballot on demand, if you've heard of ballot on demand. But we don't have ballot on demand here, so we just order more than what we need so that we don't accidentally run out. Yeah.
So if by chance you did run out, what can you do?
We have printers on staff. I mean, we use a regular printer company to print a bunch of them because we need like hundreds of thousands of ballots. If we start running out, we've got two backup printers at the office, and they can print really easily, like a stack of 200, and then we will drive them out to the polling location. So it's not like it's never happened. Yeah, it happens. It doesn't happen often. It's only happened to me once, and it was only at one polling location. And usually it's because, like, at each polling location, there may be different styles of ballots. Not everybody may be voting on the same thing. And if you look at them and you're like, oh, there's only 100 people that could vote on this particular ballot style, we'll send out 50 because it's 50% turnout. And they're like, 55 people showed up. You got to run 25 more out to make sure that everybody can do it. So we haven't had situations where people have not been able to vote because of it. Because the other nice thing is, in addition to having the printer to print out like the full paper ballots, the touchscreen machines are a good backup to have. I mean, they're good to use regardless, but they're nice if you need something in a pinch, because it's as close to ballot on demand as we have. It's just a blank piece of paper that gets inserted into it, so you don't need to pre-print anything. They get proofed multiple times. They get proofed by me, they get proofed by my elections director, and they get proofed by the person that created the ballots, in addition to our actual ballot printer. So there's 4 sets of eyes that are looking at it before anything gets to a voter, which is somewhat helpful. Sometimes we still get calls from people that are like, they leave the voting place and then they go, I don't think such and such was on my ballot. And I'm like, that would be really hard because we've looked through so many different things. It would be very difficult. But that's also why we send out sample ballots, because there can be times, and luckily it hasn't happened here, but there are places where it's happened where somebody has gotten the wrong sample ballot, or somebody's been left off of the sample ballot because something got missed in the proofing process. So it's another reason why we send those out, just to be sure. And then even when we get the ballots printed by our printer, when they come back in, our warehouse manager inventories all of them, puts tape seals on all of them to make sure that they're all secured. And we have chain of custody forms that follow the ballots throughout the process that our bipartisan election judges sign off on. So part of being an election judge or poll worker and working on it, you get to see some of the ballot inventory process, because not only do we ask the poll workers to account for all of the ballots that were cast into the machine, we make them account for the unvoted ballots too. Even though they don't have any results on them and nothing can be done with them, we want to know exactly how many blank ballots we still have. So regardless of whether it gets counted or not, every ballot is important and every ballot is kept secure. All right, so somebody asked how many voters are in each precinct. So it's a little tricky because precincts are not really set on specific numbers. And I don't want to go into it too deep because it's kind of confusing anyway. You've got precincts and then we've got splits within the precincts. So if you live in Ward 4, you may live in 4A or 4B or 4C or 4D, which is a precinct, but you may also live in 4A1 or 4A2 or 4A3. Those are splits that voters don't really need to know because it doesn't have an impact on anything other than your ballot style. But if we had precinct 4A and we sent them all to one single, or 4E is a good example. 4E votes over at a single church, and St. Andrew's Lutheran Church, but there may be 3 ballot styles there. And you go, well, it's 4E, it's all the same precinct. Why would there be 3 ballot styles? Because there's a 4E1 and a 4E2 and a 4E3, because they may have different things that they're going to be voting on. So from a voter's perspective, all they need to know is I live in 4E and 4E votes at St. Andrew's Church. We need to know that the ballots go with each of those 3 splits. So when it comes to voters in a precinct, we try to make it geographically make sense, and we try not to make them too big. But if they get too big, which we don't have like defined number 4 too big. If everybody still fits at a polling place, then it's a perfectly fine precinct. We may split it off, and we may create a new, like, 4N. We did just review part of that, like how many people are in the precinct and how should they be defined. That was part of the redistricting process in 2021 and 2022. So we have just freshly kind of gone through that process. Precincts are how we set who's going to be voting at what polling location. So if you change precincts, if you move and you change precincts, that's why your polling place will probably change too. Any other questions about this part? This is probably the driest part, I'm sorry. Then we've got everything ready to go. We're off to the races. Voting equipment preparation and testing. This is when we start having bipartisan teams come into the office, and we are physically touching every single piece of equipment to make sure that it's going to count their ballots properly. So every piece of voting equipment is tested in logic and accuracy testing. So all that means is that we're testing it, we're running ballots through it to make sure that the programming on the machine is correct. The testing is public, it's actually happening right now. And it's conducted by our bipartisan team of election judges. What they do is take ballots from every single polling place. So our warehouse manager gets all the ballots delivered, he seals them all up, and then he hand pulls ballots from every single polling place, every single style, and he creates a test deck. Depending on the size of the election, it may be a couple hundred ballots, or it may be more like 1,000 ballots. When we get to the August primary, and we have to have different party style ballots, it's a much bigger test deck, and testing takes longer. But he pulls all those out. It's a bunch of blank ballots. It becomes the test deck. We hand it to the bipartisan team, and we say, fill them out. Fill them out however you need to fill them out, and then tell us what the results are supposed to be based on what you filled them out as. And then we run them through every machine to make sure that the machine tells us, yes, that's exactly what they gave us. This said 5 yes and 4 no, and the machine says it's 5 yes and 4 no. So we touch every machine to make sure that it's counting accurately. And it's another final step to make sure that there's not anything missing on the ballot, because now we've got bipartisan election judges looking at this and saying, like, I'm pretty sure I thought so-and-so was running for city council. How come they're not on the ballot? Again, if we're finding an error at that point in the process, something else has gone terribly wrong, but it's still good to have it in there. There's never too many backups. And then this is another area where we have chain of custody. So all of these, you can kind of see it on the picture, but it's really tiny. But there is a little red seal. I can't remember the way I'm supposed to do this. I'm not supposed to use this. So for here, I'm going to show it on here. But for you all, here's a little red seal. Does anybody know why there would be a little red seal down here?
On the machine?
On the machine. Why it would be down there? Because all this stuff's up here. So why is it down here?
Ballots are caught down there.
Yeah.
You gotta open the door there.
So all of the ballots that get fed in the top fall down at the bottom. And this is the ballot door. So we want to make sure nobody's touching the ballot door. So we seal it. And then up here, there's a little seal up on the top where there's the little screen. Does anybody know why it would be up there?
I know this, I've worked enough of these. Is that what the thing counts through?
So this is where the USB drive is.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all the ballots they fall down below, but all the counting and the tabulation is up at the top.
Are you able to use your mouse again?
I was gonna do that next, I was just using this for now.
Thank you.
I knew I was doing it wrong. Up at the top.
Just keeping a watch on the folks.
I know. Say something in the chat if you can't tell what I'm looking at. But on the top here, by where the screen is, that one is where the USB drives that get tabulated. Somebody asked, are those machines ever connected to the internet for transmission of polling data? Nope. We do not transmit polling data over the internet. Every result that comes in gets At the end of the night, the election judges open up, they break that seal, they open it up, they mark down on a piece of paper that they broke the seal and that the seal is exactly the number that it should have been when it left our warehouse. And then they take the USB drive out, they put it together with that, the machine also prints out a really long receipt that has the results on it. They take that receipt, they all sign off on it, they bundle it together with the USB drive and they put it in a zipper. And then that's what they bring back, and they have to bring it back together. One supervisor can't bring it back. The Republican and Democrat together have to be in the same car with the results and the ballots, and they bring it back to our office because we don't want them at any point in the process to not be with a bipartisan team. We use these machines, and we'll go into that in the class on the machine specifically, but these are ES&S DS200, that's their official name. We purchased them in 2019 after a, I think, successful bidding process that involved the public could come out to the ARC and play with all the different machines that people were bidding on us to buy and then rank them by what they liked the most, and this one won. So we are happy with them. And then just like on the picture where you can see those two red seals, we've also got inventory tag numbers on there that are recorded and verified before the election. The voting equipment, the ballots, the supplies are all sealed too. It's not just those red types of seals. We also have yellow seals and green seals and lots of different seals that are all treated the same way, which is that they're all inspected by the bipartisan team to make sure they're not broken, and the numbers are cross-referenced with the numbers that are on a list of certifications to make sure that nobody has broken it and then put a different seal on, because we also don't want to assume that that seal is still the right seal. So I would say if you had to describe how we treat our voting equipment preparation testing with one word, I would say skeptical. So that's the whole point of having the seals and tags verified and everything else, and having election judges working on this.
So there's no way of getting those machines on the internet?
No, they're not plugged into the internet. They only get plugged into the wall outlet for power. So as we've been testing things, absentee voting is also happening. So I'm going to answer this question real fast. So somebody asked, which is a great question, once the USB drives come back to our office, what happens to them? So USB drives come back to our office, the tabulated results get imported into the standalone computer, the same one that programmed them in the first place. And then it renders a report in PDF format. We put that on a USB drive. That USB drive never touches that computer again. It only goes into another computer that is connected to the internet so that I can actually have the PDF file to put on the website. So the numbers themselves are not moving in any way. It's a PDF document that gets exported and then uploaded onto our website. The Secretary of State's office gets our final official results after Election Day in paper format. We print all of the results out off of that computer, and then we just mail them to the Secretary of State's office. The election night results get to the Secretary of State's office. We can either call them and read them out off the PDF, or the statewide voter registration database has a place where we can put our unofficial numbers. The reason why they're called unofficial numbers, because we haven't finished our certification process after the election. So that is how they get reported. There's no centralized really way to get that. Once the Secretary of State's office has them and they put them on the website, that is the end of what we do with the results. So in our office, they're kept in paper format until we export them, and then they get put on the internet. So as absentee ballots are happening, means we need the ballots, we need absentee applications processed, we need staff ready to go to assist the voters that come in to vote absentee. We're also, the 6 weeks out before Election Day, we're hiring and we're training our election judges, and we're doing a bunch of voter education. All the time we're doing voter education. That ties into hiring and training election judges too, because it's often very, very difficult to recruit enough election judges for all of our polling places. So sometimes voter education goes hand in hand with just trying to recruit election judges. But all this is happening in that 6-week period of time. And I'm purposefully not going too deep into absentee because next class is when we're going to talk about all the different forms of absentee, what other states do for absentee, how we've evolved to get to where we are, and how the process works. But the picture on there is an example of if you asked for an absentee ballot by mail, that's what you would get. And then the picture below is people standing in line absentee voting.
If you vote I've never voted absentee, so if you vote absentee, is there also a self-addressed stamped envelope in there?
Yep.
It's mailed back to your office?
Yeah, so on here, you can see the yellow thing is the picture, is the instructions, and then there's the envelope on the right side. That's the envelope that comes back to our office. It has a stamp on it.
So I, as a voter, am not out any expense.
Right. Yeah, and even if you are, there are some categories where you have to vote by absentee that require you to get a notary. Under Missouri law, notaries are not allowed to charge you. So you have to go find the notary, but you don't have to pay for one.
Thank you.
So as absentee is winding down and we've got a bunch of trained election judges, we are then ready to open our polling places. So these are 2 of our polling places and the staff that work with them that are fantastic. Polling places are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. We are a photo ID state, so you have to have a Missouri driver's license or non-driver's license, U.S. passport, card, or military ID. There is an option. There's a provisional ballot option. If you don't have a photo ID, you can vote by provisional ballot. And I think provisional ballot has this bad rap to it that people think like, well, you're just giving that to me to shut me up and I'm not actually going to have my ballot counted. This is not a real thing. I don't want to say that that is not something that happens because there is a type of provisional ballot that is given to somebody that we can't confirm their eligibility for. So if somebody shows up to vote and we don't have them on the voter list and we can't they call the office and we can't find them, they're going to get a provisional ballot so that if after the election, maybe we missed something or maybe they registered at the DMV and the DMV didn't get us their information like they were supposed to. Maybe there's some reason why they were supposed to be on the list. It just gives us additional time to look into it. Most of the time, there isn't a reason for us to count it because we did get the DMV information or they didn't fill out something that they thought that they did, and that ballot will not count. For photo ID provisional ballots specifically, this was a new type of provisional ballot that was created when photo ID passed. And the whole reason for it is if you are a person that doesn't have a photo ID. So we already know you're registered because you were in the voter list. That's why we gave you a ballot in the first place. So we don't have to worry about it not counting because you're not eligible. We have to signature match the the provisional ballot envelope signature with the signature on your voter registration record. So that process occurs with a bipartisan judge bipartisan team of judges who look at the signature on the envelope, look at the signature on your voter record, and then determine whether it's the same person. And 99% of the time, they determine that they are, and that ballot counts. So if you have ever heard like, well, provisional ballots don't count, sometimes they don't, but for photo ID ones, they do. I'm talking specifically for Boone County, but I've also seen the numbers from other counties in the state. And while they may not be like 99%, they're usually in the high 90s. It's pretty rare when one doesn't get counted, and the reasons for it not counting are like they didn't fill it out completely, so they didn't sign it at all, or an election judge forgot to sign it because they're supposed to sign it too, and there's some other like structural reason why we couldn't count it, not because the signatures didn't match. So on election day, it may take a little longer if you're going to vote a provisional ballot, but it is an option for people. Yes.
What leeway do they have about signature matching? Because like if a person registered to vote years ago and now they're sick or, you know, have Parkinson's or whatever, and their signature isn't the same as it was 20 years ago.
Yes. So that is a great question. One of the ways that we try to account for that is by, and I kind of glossed over this when we talked about voter registration, but part of inputting the information into the voter registration database is taking a scan of the image of the voter registration document. So if you have updated your address at any point in time, we've got an image of your signature. If you have asked for an absentee ballot, we have an image of your signature. So there are multiple versions of signatures on everybody's voter record. It may not be like, if you register to vote once and you never move again and you've never requested an absentee ballot, yeah, we may only have one signature for you. But this is one of the areas, if we are talking about like places for improvement, there are no statewide rules about signature matching. There's no statewide training about signature matching, and there's nothing in the law that determines like how to do signature matching. So it's very discretionary. It's why we use bipartisan judges. Technically, the law says you just check them. So like a clerk could check it on their own. I would much prefer to have bipartisan judges be the people determining what they are. But I have been I'm still in the room when it's happening, and oftentimes they will look through 3 and 4 signatures on a voter just to make sure, because if one of them has any doubt and says like, that one looks a little tricky, you can go back through the old ones and be like, oh, I see where it's evolved over time and how we got to where we are. Oh, somebody asked, are all the people working at polling places polling judges, or are there other workers? So this is another area where, with the decentralized nature of elections, they are called election judges in Missouri law. That's what a poll worker is. They are synonymous, interchangeable terms, but we call them election judges. At each poll, you've got bipartisan teams of election judges, and then you've got a supervisor that's a Republican and a supervisor that's a Democrat. That's their supervisor election judges. And then we also have youth election participants who are under the age of 18 that are high school students that have been nominated by their school, and they help out at the election, but they can't sign anything. They can't be one of the people that are like signing off on our chain of custody or on the ballots, but they are very helpful for assisting voters and checking in voters on the poll pads, because we use iPads to check in voters, and high school students really like that because they use iPads at school all the time, so they're really comfortable with them. So on election day, all these judges are working at all these polling locations. We also have central polling locations, which lots of folks don't know about, I think mostly because most of the time people don't feel like they need them. They just go to their assigned poll and they're done. But central polling locations are a really nice option for if you're not in the general area of your polling place assignment and you're not sure you're going to get back to it in time that day, stop by a central poll. So our central poll locations, one is at the Boone County Government Center. So if you're already downtown someday, on an election day, you can come in and vote. We've got one north of town at Friendship Baptist Church, and then we've got one south of town at Woodcrest Chapel. So we've tried to kind of put them in different areas of Columbia. And just like every other polling place, we have bipartisan election judge teams at them. And the process is exactly the same. The only difference is that every single ballot style that is available in Boone County is at the central polling locations. So that way, no matter where you live, your ballot is there. So, well, this kind of goes to the question that was asked before, but this is always good to go over again. So the picture on the top, remember how I said that they take all of the pieces of paper and the USB sticks and they put them in a zipper and then give them back to us? That's them. That's the little zipper bag that the USBs come back to our office in. And they get inputted in, they're all labeled by what polling place they are so that we have them, we can keep track of all of them. When they get imported in, they get put right back in the bag so that we don't lose track of them. They're all accounted for. And they're delivered to us by the bipartisan election supervisors that travel together. Those blue bags there are what the ballots themselves are kept in, and that you can see on there, like how I said, we have those tape seals, the red seals, we also have yellow seals. Those yellow tags that you can see are actually sealing together the bag so you can't unzip it without breaking that seal. So all of the election materials that come back are zipped up, the ballots themselves are zipped back up. The two election judge supervisors sign off that they have done the sealing at the polling place. So they have to be sealed when they're being transported, and then they stay sealed and put into the vault of our office. So we have a locked vault that we keep everything in for 30 days, which is the period of time when election contest lawsuits could happen. We keep them all in our office because we do have an annex out by the sheriff's jail. And that's where, if you've been a poll worker before, that's where you pick up your supplies. But that's also where we keep all our voting equipment. So the voting equipment stays there, the ballots go back there, everything kind of happens at the warehouse that needs to be secured, and it's by like 3 card access doors before you can get to them.
How long do they store those?
We keep them, federal and state law require us to keep the ballots and then absentee ballot applications, anything relevant that's like paperwork for 22 months. So we normally, it ends up being more like 24 months, but all of those, so like they have to stay, we have to keep them, but they can't be, you can't just walk in and look at all of them. You still have to get a court order to actually like see the ballots, but we do have to keep them for that long.
I just was wondering how much room they took up in the warehouse.
A lot, they keep a lot. Although most of what ends up taking up the room is the unvoted ballots because we have to order so many more ballots. So we just have tons of pallets of things. So every couple years we have to get rid of like 6 huge pallets worth of
How do you do that?
papers. We have a secure shredding contract, and the shredding company comes and picks them up, and then somebody from my office follows the truck back to the location and watches them be shredded. And then we get a little sign-off thing that says, yes, it's been shredded.
That's a good afternoon job.
Okay, somebody asked how many polling places there are in Boone County. That's a great question too. Ours are variable. So for the April election and oftentimes also the August election, we use the same set of polls. It's about 44 polls. And we do that because when there's lower turnout, you can assign more registered voters to a location because you know that not all of those people are going to turn out. When you get into a higher turnout election like November, we get close to double of that. We get more like 70 polling locations because if we were going to assign 5,000 people and only 500 were going to show up, but we know for presidential more like 2,000 are going to show up, we need to split them off into more polling locations. So that's also sometimes what makes it more challenging to find enough election judges because every polling place requires at least 5 or 6 poll workers for every election. So it becomes a Herculean effort sometimes to find enough election judges / poll workers to do that. Now, like all the stuff is back, everything gets put in, we're at the unofficial results level. How do we know everything happened correctly? And this is the part that I think gets lost sometimes because once the results come out, everybody goes, okay, I know who won then. And that's the end of it. And if the results change after that time, it makes everybody suspicious because it's hard to remember that this process happens after election day too. In Missouri, in other places, everybody has a form of certification that involves some sort of audit Ours happens so quickly because we don't have a long period of time where we're like accepting absentee ballots and things like that. All ballots have to be into us by election night. That's not the case for every state, which is why sometimes you'll see election results change. But for us, election results would only change if we found an error. So, election judges have accounted for everything. We review all of that in the certification period. And then within 2 weeks of the election, we have a bipartisan election judge team come in. And you can see that's me and the 2 bipartisan people, and we're doing the hand count part. So that's what we're doing in that picture. But the election judge team comes in and adjudicates the provisional ballots. So they do that signature matching. But they also look at the ones that were cast because we couldn't determine if they were eligible. So we also have to show them, we have to do our little research and then present to the election judges. We could not find a voter registration on this person. Here's a history of they were registered to vote in St. Louis, but they never registered here. Here's all the documentation. And then the bipartisan judge team is the official team that says, yeah, we can't count this provisional ballot then. So we do all of the evidence research and things, but it's up to the bipartisan election judge team to make the call. And then this ends up being a very small number of ballots, but we do have a statutory requirement that any military or overseas ballots that we have issued in the course of the election, if they come back by noon on Friday after the election, they can be counted. That happens very rarely. It's usually only 1 or 2 ballots. But our election judge team is the one that counts those. And then they also adjudicate any write-in votes. So the town of Hartsburg, Village of Hartsburg, is a really great example because Hartsburg, in most people I don't think know this because they don't live in Hartsburg, their Board of Aldermen, Board of Selectmen is 100% elected by write-in exclusively. So if you are a resident of Hartsburg and you want to vote on who you want to have as your representative on your local board, you won't know that until we certify the election because the write-in votes are not adjudicated, tabulated, or like known by the time we get to election night because visually somebody has to look at them all and write them all down. We do that during the certification process. So Hartsburg never has unofficial results. They only ever get official results. And then importantly, I would say most importantly, but this is what the picture is, we are required under law and our Code of State Regulations to do a hand count of all of the ballots cast from a randomly selected 5% of precincts. So what that normally looks like is we have little pieces of paper that we've written every single polling place on, and then 5% of 44 polling places or 5% of 78 polling locations, depending on how many we have. We have the bipartisan team draw out the names of however many we need. Usually that's like 3. And then they have to count all the ballots from those 3 polling locations and make sure that what results they got match exactly what the tabulators said on them. And we have never had them not match. They have always matched. Actually, I don't think I've talked to a single county that has had them not match before. Yep.
So the poll workers, election judges get paid for working on election day and training. So you've got some of these people who are working after the election. Do they get paid also for those times too?
Yep. Yep, they get paid hourly rates. So sometimes certification lasts like 2 hours, like Ashland, the February Ashland election, only 250 people voted or something like that. That was a 15-minute certification process because that's how long it took. So sometimes it's a little bit and sometimes it's like a 2 or 3 day long thing. Oh, that was my last thing. Look at that. We've got 8 minutes left for more questions. I know that this was a ton of information in a short amount of time. And I don't expect, like, the other classes are not dependent on remembering all of these things. Mostly what I wanted to do is provide like an overview so that you know the whole parts of the process, and then I'm gonna zoom in on a couple of the areas for the other 3 classes. So, this is really, hopefully just kind of a foundation, but was there anything that you had like a burning question for that you really wanted to know?
How do you, oh, sorry, somebody else before me.
Oh, I just wanted to ask Brianna, will you stop your screen share maybe? So it'll be more like a classroom, or do you want to keep your slides up?
No, I can, there we go.
How do you get kicked off the, voter rolls?
Are you kicked off the voter roll?
Yeah, permanently.
Actually, that is a great
What do I
question.
have to do? Not that I want. If you wanted to kick me off, what do I have to be guilty of?
If you're gonna get your right taken away from you, you're either gonna have to violate an election law, so commit election fraud, or basically have a felony sentence that never ends. So, for the most part, we have a pretty good system of getting people that are, or you'd be adjudged incapacitated forever. But most of the time, if somebody is going to lose the right to vote forever and ever, it's because they've committed an election crime. Which might be like tampering with the election or casting a ballot that they weren't supposed to, that sort of thing.
And if I do that in Missouri and you catch me, and I would deserve to be caught because that's a wicked thing, and then I move to Illinois, does Illinois or anybody, any state, when somebody comes in to register from a different state, do you ever check with the former state to see if this is a bad person or not?
So we do get felony records from other states. So if you committed a crime in another state, and that's a great example, the decentralization does require us to have that kind of communication, because there are some states that you don't get your, like, once a felon, always off the roll type of situation. Tennessee is like that. So if you were a felon in Missouri for an unrelated election reason, you get reinstated back onto our roll. But if you move to Tennessee, that felony has followed you and you can't vote in Tennessee. But you could vote in Missouri if you move back to Missouri. So every state has a different way of doing it. What I did want to talk about, because it reminded me of that, is that national requirement for list maintenance. That process, if you're going to be taken off the roll, because lots of times you hear voter roll purging, that process is the canvass process. And in the way that we follow that process in Missouri, we send the 2 pieces of mail. And then if we don't hear from you after 30 days of sending that second letter that says like, hey, we tried to send you mail and you didn't reply, so like, give us your email or give us your address or whatever it is. After 30 days, you get put in inactive status. And inactive status means you can still vote, everything is perfectly fine. But if you show up at a polling place, the election judge is going to say, we need your new address. You're in inactive status. We need to get your new information to bump you back into active status. If you never do that, because let's say you legitimately did move somewhere else, you stay in inactive status through 2 federal election cycles. So if you went inactive today and you didn't vote in November of 2024, and you didn't vote again in November of 2026, then in December of 2026, I will permanently delete you from the roll.
Okay.
So it's a long process. The law has a huge leeway for, like, at some point in that, as long as somebody does something, takes some sort of action on their voter registration record, we can bump them back into active status. I am always happier when people remove themselves. We have a form that people can fill out that's like, I moved and just take me off the roll, please. Because what we do lack, although we have within the states, if you move to Callaway, Callaway knows and I know, and Callaway just picks up your record and moves you into Callaway. We don't have that for Illinois. We don't have that for anywhere else. We used to have a mechanism. There was a report that we used to have, but we no longer have that available at the state level anymore. So that's where that mail canvas is still very important, because there's no other way for us to know if you've registered in Illinois.
Thank you.
If someone has passed away and, you say, you know, you get the information from the state or whatever, do you also want relatives to, take them off the ballot or?
So, I like, and this is like my personal preference, because again, there are some areas of the law that just don't have a mechanism laid out in them. So our personal policy is, we'll get information from Health and Human Services. It'll also tell us if somebody's passed away when we do the, Social Security Administration list. But I also like to have an obituary on file if I can find one. So part of our weekly processes are going through all the obituaries from the county and then marrying them together with a report from Social Security Administration or Department of Health and Human Services. So we've got two elements to indicate like, yes, this person definitely did die, because false positives can happen and we try to limit them. So if we get one, if somebody emails us, which we do, they'll say like, I've got a death certificate, I thought I should give it to you. We don't need it, but it's a good indication like, oh, okay, well, we can include it and then also check against Human Services and make sure that they're deceased in that status too. But we don't ever, I mean, this is something too, which sometimes I think gets confusing. You're never completely removed from anything. You're in deleted status. We want to be able to see you in deleted status. You have a history of voting in this county. You're never going to be completely gone from our list. You're just going to be in deleted status. And we are not allowed to reinstate you unless you fill out a new voter registration form. So it's important for like a checks and balances perspective. Even if somebody dies, you're going to be able to see their record. You're just going to see that it shows that you're dead. But there are sometimes some people want like to be purged completely. There's no way to do that.
Anybody have some questions on the chat?
Oh, does having a law degree help you in this position? There's only 2 of us in the state that run elections at the local level that have law degrees. I find it helpful, not necessarily for running the office, but for working with other clerks. Like a lot of times other clerks will ask me for like my interpretation of a statute. And I do presentations for our Clerks Association on how to read a statute and how to read a bill. So that they're interpreting things correctly, because there really is there's no handbook for this job right now. Like the state does not provide us with a handbook. So I know what the photo ID requirements are, and I've looked at the law to determine what they are. But let's say a new clerk comes in that's never done this job before, that has no background in elections. They may look at the statute and be like, I don't know what the statute means. And so they just rely on what somebody else gives them. I like to make sure that clerks have the tools that they need, and I think having a law degree helps with that. And then somebody asked about cast vote records, which is something I want to get into when we talk about voting machines, but it's also something that is being talked about in the legislature right now. So if you know what a cast vote record is, I would recommend you look at some of the bills that are being sponsored, because there are some state senators in particular that want to know about them. Cast vote records are a report that come out of the election software that we use for doing the tabulations and things like that.
Did you say that word again, catchment?
Cast vote record.
Spell it?
C-A-S-T, and then vote, and then record. Cast vote record, yeah. It's basically a itemized list of all of the ballots that were cast, but in digital format. So not images, but like literal, like ballot was cast at this time for these things. It's like a log. Any other questions? I know I went a little over on time.
Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you.
Brianna, thank you, and we look forward to seeing everybody again next week.
They have these bookmarks if you want some bookmarks.